morning sky hung heavy with gray clouds as Margaret Hale, a powerful and impeccably dressed businesswoman, stepped out of her car at the cemetery. Despite her tailored coat and polished heels, nothing could hide the quiet grief etched into her face. She came here once every month without fail. This visit was no different, solemn, private, and painful. She walked the familiar path between rows of silent headstones until she reached one she knew by heart. Daniel Hale, beloved son, gone too soon. Margaret knelt slowly, brushing away fallen leaves with trembling fingers. Daniel had been her only child, the light of her life. Years ago, a tragic accident had taken him away, leaving behind a success she could no longer fully enjoy. Boardrooms bowed to her authority, but here among the dead she was simply a grieving mother. As she placed fresh white lilies beside the grave, a soft sound broke the silence. Crying. Margaret froze. It wasn't the distant sob of an adult, but something gentler, higher, more fragile. She followed the sound with cautious steps until she reached the grave beside her son's. There knelt a young Spanish woman, her dark hair pulled back loosely, tears streaming freely down her face. Clutched against her side was a little girl, no older than 4, holding a small stuffed bear. The child's eyes were red, but she didn't cry. She simply stared at the headstone in confusion and quiet sadness. Margaret's heart tightened. The Spanish woman whispered something in her native language, her voice breaking. She pressed her forehead against the stone, shoulders shaking. Margaret couldn't understand the words, but grief spoke a universal language. Unsure whether to interrupt, Margaret stood back, until the little girl turned and looked directly at her. Those eyes, Margaret's breath caught. They were the same deep hazel eyes Daniel had inherited from his father, the same curve of the brows, the same fragile expression he wore as a child when he was hurt but trying to be brave. The child stared at Margaret for a long moment, then tugged gently at the Spanish woman's sleeve and whispered, "Mama." The woman looked up, startled, and noticed Margaret for the first time. "I'm sorry," Margaret said softly. "I didn't mean to intrude, I heard crying." The Spanish woman wiped her tears, nodding politely. "It's okay," she replied in accented English. This is her papa." Margaret's world tilted. Her eyes slowly moved to the name carved on the stone beside Daniel's. It was his name, and suddenly, nothing in her carefully controlled life felt solid anymore. Margaret felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She stared at the headstone again, tracing the familiar letters, with her eyes as if they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. "This is Daniel Hale," she said quietly, her voice barely holding together. The Spanish woman nodded, pulling the little girl closer. "See, Daniel, my husband." Her accent grew thicker as emotion returned. "He was very kind, very gentle. Husband." The word echoed painfully in Margaret's mind. Daniel had never mentioned a wife or a child. "My name is Lucia," the woman continued softly. "And this is Sophia." She rested her hand on the little girl's shoulder. "She misses her papa every day." Sophia looked up at Margaret again, studying her with innocent curiosity. "Are you sad too?" the child asked in careful English. Margaret swallowed hard. "Yes," she managed, "I am." She lowered herself slowly onto the bench nearby, her strength suddenly gone. Memories rushed back. Daniel's last phone call, his laughter. The way he'd said he was busy with work overseas. Had that been a lie? Or had he been protecting something precious? "I didn't know," Margaret said honestly. "I'm his mother." Lucia's eyes widened. For a moment, fear flickered across her face, followed quickly by hesitation. "He spoke of you," she said after a pause. "He said you were strong, powerful, that he hoped one day you would forgive him." "Forgive him?" Margaret pressed her hand to her chest, pain tightening her breath. "Forgive him for what?" Lucia reached into her purse with shaking fingers and pulled out a folded photograph. She handed it to Margaret. It was Daniel, older, thinner, but unmistakably him, standing in a modest Spanish village, his arm wrapped protectively around Lucia. In his arms, a newborn baby slept peacefully. Margaret's tears spilled freely now. "He didn't want to disappoint you," Lucia said. "He was afraid you would think his life was small." Small? Margaret, who had spent a lifetime building empires, suddenly felt unbearably small herself. "I never would have thought that," she whispered. I just wanted him safe. Sophia climbed onto the bench beside her, pressing the stuffed bear into Margaret's hand. Papa said bears are for people who cry, she said seriously. Margaret laughed through her tears, clutching the bear tightly. In that quiet cemetery surrounded by truth and loss, Margaret realized something profound. She hadn't just lost a son. She had gained a family she never knew existed. The wind stirred softly through the cemetery trees as Margaret sat in silence, the small stuffed bear resting in her lap. Sophia leaned against her side as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Lucia watched them closely, unsure whether this moment would end in comfort or heartbreak. I had no idea, Margaret said again, her voice steadier now, though her eyes were still wet. Daniel never told me he had a family. Lucia nodded. He wanted to, she replied, many times, but he was afraid you would ask him to choose between you and us. Margaret closed her eyes. The thought cut deep. I would never have asked that, she whispered. A mother should never be a burden. She looked down at Sophia, studying the little girl's face, the familiar curve of her nose, the softness of her smile. It was like seeing Daniel as a child all over again. Her heart tightened, but this time, the pain carried something else with it, responsibility. Does she know who I am? Margaret asked. Lucia shook her head. Only that you are someone Papa loved. Margaret reached out hesitantly and brushed a strand of hair from Sophia's eyes. Then maybe, she said softly, I can be someone who loves her too. Lucia's breath caught. You mean? I don't want this to be the last time we meet, Margaret said. If you'll allow it, I want to be part of her life. Lucia's composure broke. Tears streamed freely as she nodded. Daniel would have wanted that. They stayed there longer than Margaret ever had before, sharing stories of Daniel, his humor, his kindness, the way he used to sing softly to Sophia at night. With each memory, the ache of loss transformed slowly into something warmer. When it was time to leave, Margaret stood and took a deep breath. She looked at her son's grave one last time. You did good, she whispered. Better than I ever knew. Sophia slipped her small hand into Margaret's. The simple gesture shattered. Something hardened inside her chest and rebuilt it into something new. As they walked toward the exit together, Margaret realized her life had quietly changed direction. The boardrooms, the contracts, the endless pursuit of success suddenly felt distant. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking away from a grave. She was walking toward family,